This happened when I was 22, fresh out of college and completely broke. I had just moved to Chicago for my first real job, some entry-level marketing position that barely paid enough to cover rent in the cheapest neighborhood I could find. The apartment hunting process was absolutely brutal. Everything decent was way out of my price range, and the stuff I could afford was either a complete dump or had some major red flag that made me want to run the other way. After about 3 weeks of searching, I was getting desperate. My temporary stay at a friend's couch was wearing thin, and I needed to find something fast. That's when I saw the Craigslist ad for a basement apartment in Wicker Park. The rent was almost too good to be true, like significantly cheaper than anything else I'd seen in that area. The ad was pretty bare bones, just said cozy basement studio, utilities included, quiet building, available immediately. I should have known something was up, but I was young and desperate and honestly just relieved to find something in my budget. The landlord's name was Mrs. Chen, and she seemed nice enough when I called. She had this soft, grandmotherly voice and kept apologizing for the short notice, but said she could show me the place that same evening if I was interested. The building was one of those old Chicago 3-flats, probably built in the 1920s. It looked pretty well maintained from the outside, brick facade, decent front yard, nothing too sketchy about the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen met me at the front door. She was exactly what I had pictured based on her voice, probably in her 70s, maybe 5 feet tall, wearing this floral dress that looked like something my grandmother would have worn. The apartment is downstairs, she explained as we walked around to the side of the building. It has its own entrance, so you won't have to bother the upstairs tenants. The entrance was basically just a door at ground level that led directly to a staircase going down. Mrs. Chen unlocked it and flicked on a light switch, illuminating a narrow wooden staircase that looked like it hadn't been updated since the building was constructed. "Watch your head," she said as we started down. "The ceiling gets a bit low in some spots." She wasn't kidding. I'm about 6 feet tall, and I had to duck in several places just to avoid hitting my head on the exposed beams. The apartment itself was, well, it was exactly what you'd expect from a basement studio. Low ceilings, concrete walls that had been painted white, small windows near the ceiling that barely let in any natural light. But it was clean, and it had everything I needed, a tiny kitchen area, a bathroom that was smaller than most closets, and enough space for a bed and maybe a small desk. Previous tenant moved out last month, Mrs. Chen explained as I looked around. Nice young man, very quiet. He was here for almost 2 years. I asked why he moved, and she said something about him getting a job in another city. Nothing unusual about that. The rent really was as cheap as the ad had indicated, and Mrs. Chen said I could move in immediately if I wanted. First month's rent plus a security deposit, no credit check required. Looking back, I should have asked more questions. Like why she didn't need a credit check, or why the rent was so much cheaper than comparable places. But I was just so relieved to find something I could afford that I didn't want to rock the boat. I signed the lease that night and moved in the following weekend. The first few weeks were pretty normal. The apartment was definitely small and kind of depressing. Those tiny windows didn't let in much light, so I had to keep lamps on pretty much all the time. But it was mine, and after sleeping on couches and air mattresses for months, having my own space felt incredible. I did notice some weird things, though. Little stuff that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. The apartment got really cold at night, even during the summer. I'd go to bed comfortable and wake up shivering, even with the windows closed and no air conditioning running. I figured it was just because I was below ground level. Basements are naturally cooler, right? There were also these weird sounds coming from the walls. Not like plumbing or anything mechanical, more like scratching or tapping. It was pretty faint, and it usually happened late at night when I was trying to fall asleep. I mentioned it to Mrs. Chen when I ran into her in the front yard one day, and she said it was probably just mice in the walls. Old building, she explained. Nothing to worry about. She offered to have an exterminator come take a look, but I told her not to bother. I've lived in old buildings before, and weird noises are pretty much par for the course. The first really strange thing happened about a month after I moved in. I was working late one night, probably around 11 p.m., when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Not unusual in itself, since I knew there were tenants in the upper floors. But these footsteps were different. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. and they seemed to be coming from directly above my apartment, which according to Mrs. Chen was supposed to be a storage area, not a living space. The pacing went on for maybe 20 minutes, then stopped. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone was organizing stuff in storage, or maybe I was wrong about which part of the building the sound was coming from. But it happened again the next night. Same time, same slow pacing pattern. And the night after that. After about a week of this, I decided to ask Mrs. Chen about it. I caught her checking the mail one afternoon and mentioned the noise. "Storage area," she said, looking confused. "Oh no, dear, there's no storage above you. That's Mr. Patterson's living room." That was weird, because she had definitely told me it was storage when I first looked at the place. But I figured maybe I had misunderstood, or maybe she had forgotten what she'd said. I asked about Mr. Patterson, and she said he was a retired gentleman who kept to himself. Very quiet, she assured me. If I was hearing footsteps, it was probably just him getting up to use the bathroom or something. But the pacing continued every night, always at the same time, always the same slow, deliberate pattern. It was starting to keep me awake, which was affecting my work. I thought about going upstairs and introducing myself to Mr. Patterson, maybe politely asking if he could be a bit quieter late at night. But something about the whole situation felt off, and I didn't want to start drama with a neighbor I'd never met. Things escalated about 2 weeks later. I was lying in bed around midnight, listening to the usual pacing sounds, when I heard something new. A low thumping noise, like something heavy being dropped on the floor. Then silence. Then more thumping. This went on for maybe 10 minutes, and then everything went quiet. The next morning, I decided I had to say something. The noise was getting ridiculous, and I was barely sleeping. I went upstairs to the main entrance and found the directory by the mailboxes. There were 3 apartments listed, 1A, 2A, and 2B. No Mr. Patterson. I knocked on 1A first, figuring that was the apartment directly above mine. A young woman answered, probably about my age, wearing scrubs like she worked at a hospital. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but I live in the basement apartment, and I've been hearing some pretty loud noises coming from upstairs late at night. I was wondering if you knew anything about it." She looked confused. "What kind of noises?" I described the pacing and the thumping sounds, and she shook her head. "That's weird," she said. "I work night shifts, so I'm usually not home during those hours. But I've never heard anything like that when I am here." I asked about the other tenants, and she said 2A was a young couple who both worked regular day jobs, and 2B was empty, had been for several months. "What about Mr. Patterson?" I asked. She looked even more confused. "I don't know anyone by that name." "Are you sure you have the right building?" I thanked her and went back downstairs, feeling more unsettled than before. Why would Mrs. Chen lie about who lived upstairs? And if all the tenants worked normal hours or weren't home at night, where were the sounds coming from? That night, I decided to do some investigating. When the pacing started around 11 p.m., I grabbed a flashlight and quietly made my way upstairs. The front door to the building was locked, but I had a key since I was technically a tenant. I let myself in and stood in the hallway, listening. The pacing sounds were definitely coming from somewhere upstairs, but they seemed muffled, like they were coming from inside the walls or from some part of the building I couldn't access. I tried knocking on the doors of 1A and 2A, but nobody answered. Either they were asleep or they really weren't home. I was about to give up and go back downstairs when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that didn't match the others. It was smaller, painted a different color, and it didn't have an apartment number on it. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and found myself looking at another staircase, this one leading up to what must have been the 3rd floor. But according to the directory, there were only 2 floors of apartments in this building. I climbed the stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The staircase was dusty and obviously hadn't been used in a while, but I could hear the pacing sounds getting louder as I went up. At the top of the stairs was a small landing with a single door. The door was closed, but I could see light coming from underneath it. And the pacing sounds were definitely coming from inside. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to knock and see who answered. But a bigger part of me was starting to get really creeped out by the whole situation. The pacing stopped suddenly, and I heard footsteps approaching the door from the other side. I panicked and ran back down the stairs as quietly as I could, not stopping until I was back in my apartment with the door locked behind me. The next day, I called Mrs. Chen and asked her about the third floor. "Third floor," she said. "Oh, that's just storage space. We don't rent it out." I asked if anyone had access to it, and she said just her and the maintenance guy. "Is there any chance someone might be staying up there without permission?" I asked. She laughed. "Oh no, dear. Nobody would want to stay up there. It's not livable space, no heat, no plumbing, just a bunch of old furniture and boxes." But I had seen light coming from under the door. And the pacing sounds were definitely coming from someone walking around, not just settling building noises. I decided to do some research on the building. I spent an evening at the library looking through old city records and newspaper archives. What I found made my blood run cold. The building had been the site of a murder back in 1978. A man named David Patterson had been living in what was then a third-floor apartment. According to the newspaper article, he had been found dead in his apartment after neighbors complained about a smell. The article said he had been dead for several weeks before anyone found him. The cause of death was listed as suspicious circumstances, but no one was ever charged with his murder. After the incident, the third floor had been converted to storage space and was no longer rented out as an apartment. Mr. Patterson, the same name Mrs. Chen had given me when I asked about the noise upstairs. I confronted her about it the next time I saw her. "You told me the noise was coming from Mr. Patterson's apartment," I said. "But there is no Mr. Patterson. There's just a storage room where a man named David Patterson was murdered 40 years ago." Mrs. Chen's face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she was going to deny it, but then she just sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice," she said quietly. "Notice what?" "The sounds. The pacing. Most tenants don't hear it, or they just ignore it. But every now and then, someone like you comes along, someone who's sensitive to these things." She explained that she had been renting out the basement apartment for years, and about half the tenants reported hearing strange noises. The other half never heard anything at all. "David Patterson was troubled," she said. "He was paranoid, thought people were trying to break into his apartment. He used to pace back and forth for hours every night, checking and rechecking his locks." "And you think he's still doing that?" Mrs. Chen shrugged. "I don't know what to think. All I know is that the sound started right after he died, and they've never stopped." I asked why she didn't tell tenants about the building's history, and she said it was because most people wouldn't rent the apartment if they knew. "But it's not dangerous," she insisted. "He's never hurt anyone. He just paces." I wanted to believe her, but I was having trouble sleeping and the whole situation was making me increasingly uncomfortable. That night, I decided to try to communicate with whatever was upstairs. When the pacing started around 11 p.m., I knocked on my ceiling 3 times. The pacing stopped immediately. I waited a few seconds, then knocked again. 3 knocks came back from above. I knocked twice. 2 knocks in response. I knocked 4 times. 4 knocks back. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. It was like having a conversation with someone through the ceiling, except neither of us could actually say anything. Finally, I knocked once and said, "David? Is that you?" The response was immediate and loud, a series of rapid, frantic knocks that went on for almost 30 seconds. Then silence. The pacing didn't resume that night, and I didn't hear anything else from upstairs. But the next morning, I found something that made me decide to move out immediately. There was a note slipped under my door. It was written in shaky handwriting on a piece of yellowed paper. "They're coming. They're coming for me. Lock your doors. Don't let them in." I packed my stuff that same day and broke my lease. Mrs. Chen was understanding about it. She even gave me back my security deposit without any argument. I never found out who killed David Patterson or why he's apparently still pacing around that third-floor storage room. But I did learn something important. When an apartment is significantly cheaper than everything else in the area, there's usually a reason for it. And sometimes, that reason is worth paying extra to avoid.